What's a good word, everyone? It's your boy DKB here. I just want to say thanks for all the support. The channel's been steadily growing, and the number you see below, you can drop a text, shoot a voicemail, any ideas, topics, collabs, etc. you guys want to see. I'll include them in future videos and live streams, and I'll catch you again. Be easy. What's a good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here, and I wanted to recap all of the moves from yesterday. We know of the blockbuster trades. We know of the players that we acquired. There was also a final under the radar edition as final processing got done that I'll catch you guys up to date on. But let's kick things off, as well as generally just kind of give my final thoughts about everything, right? I've finally had some hours to just settle in and rethink this whole thing from start to finish and kind of what that means for us. But let's talk about some of the moves that didn't happen first, right? One thing, Diana Rossini, and I think this is important just because it gives us the framework of what Glenn and Darren Mougey's mentality may be. Now, Diana Rossini reported that AFC East teams reached out to the Jets about potential deals, but New York was reluctant to trade with division rivals, according to one of her sources. Now, this is important for a few factors. One, this doesn't say we're completely excluding them, right? I guess the never say never mantra type of thing. But we already know one of the things that endeared us to Glenn was that he debuffed the interview with the Patriots, and ultimately they probably would have went Mike Vrabel anyways, but he outright refused to interview with them. We know that he seems to, if anybody was going to live up to that rivalry, that blood feud, if you will, between the Patriots and the Jets, it feels like it's Glenn. So I can imagine us being hard-pressed to ever trade with them. But we also still need, which, by the way, we faced twice still this season, we also still need to play the Dolphins. And while they're floundering, you don't want to help accelerate a rebuild for what looks like will be a new regime next year and have to see the player that may end up sticking the fork in you twice every year for the next couple of years. And then, of course, with the Bills, you want to be able to knock the alpha dog off. So you're by no means definitely helping them out, right? So in black and white terms, it makes a ton of sense to me, but I still like, at least the way it was quoted, that it doesn't seem like the door is necessarily always shut, right? There are going to be those rare situations where it does feel like just a win-win trade, two teams that just happen to have players that can fill dire needs on both sides, or, help lift things up a little bit while still feeling like they have the upper hand in terms of how matchups play out. Now, when we get into the players specifically, let's talk about Breece Hall, because he was a player. I feel like he's had the longest time to endure trade rumors, right? Probably 7-8+ months now. And it does look like we ended up receiving an offer, right? According to SNY, the Chiefs did offer up a 4th-round pick. We heard the recent rumors that the value Darren Mougey drew in the sand was a 3rd-round pick. And at least according to this, it looks like he was willing to stick to that. So you're kind of getting the flashes of Joe Douglas. He was more so strict in terms of what his cap numbers and contract extension decisions were going to look like, whereas Darren Mougey may be a little bit more stringent on, no, I see this guy as a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, etc. round pick. That's what I expect to get, right? I'm not settling. I'm not going to be the person getting fleeced. So I do love that mentality. Now, with that said, what's the difference between a 3rd and a 4th? It could be monumental, right? The 3rd still gives you opportunities like we've seen recently. Azareye'h Thomas, a guy that many people could have considered a 1st-round cornerback, falls all the way to the 3rd because of athleticism questions, right? You think about guys like I just heard this name again. Wide receiver, used to be with the Dolphins, had a terrible combine. The name's not coming to me, but either way, every year there's numerous guys that drop down for what seems to be no legitimate reason. And if it does, if that does happen to happen, it generally occurs because guys aren't comfortable with the athleticism and the underwear Olympics at the combine and all that kind of stuff, right? So definitely prime opportunity to pick someone up in the 3rd, whereas the 4th, a little less likely, but still definitely a lot of guys that you would love. But in Breece Hall's case, in the New York Jets situation, it feels like once you traded Sauce Gardner, the floodgates opened up for everything else, right? At least from my understanding, Garrett Wilson ultimately ended up being the only untouchable player, and of course one that potentially people would have been making offers for out there. But once you trade Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams, aging guy, 7 seasons, hasn't seen many wins, etc. You try to move on from him and that potential contract headache that would come. And then when you flip it to the offense, it's Garrett Wilson, and then technically it's everybody else, right? Breece Hall legitimately used to be that guy for us, and we still see, of course, the games even this season where, yeah, he can take over an entire 60 minutes of football, right? Splash play after splash play after splash play, contribute in the ground, contribute through the air. But whether it's usage, whether it's health, whether it's just utilization issues, whether it's game flow, game planning problems, there's always just been a little something disjointed about his ability or our lack of ability to maximize his skill set out there, keep him involved, keep him looking like a top 5-ish running back in the NFL. So why not go ahead and release him for the 4th? Now, depth at running back would be the primary concern here for me, but ultimately it feels like you would go into the offseason. I don't get the vibes that he would be willing to give a hometown discount or that he would be willing to even return to the New York Jets. So you're looking at him walking out of the door. I doubt you're even wanting to use the franchise tag for him, right? Which would probably be, I don't know, top of my head, maybe 8 to 9 million or something like that for a running back. Maybe less. I don't know what the market is off the top of my head, but something substantial to where it would make you want to second guess things, right? Did see he tweeted some stuff out after the trades, sick about my brothers, man, happy for them, but I'm sick right now. And the way that I took that was, you see Sauce Gardner going to the Colts, 7-1, 7-2 record, whatever that is, but definitely playoff bound, definitely Super Bowl hopefuls. The trade for Sauce Gardner pretty much proves that, right? Quinnen Williams, Cowboys, they're 3-5. Obviously, things haven't worked out in the way they expect to, but it's been defensive problems, not offense. Quinnen goes in there, immediately helps out. They still have time to turn things around and be able to make a playoff entrance, right? Breece Hall's case, 1-7 season with the Jets, not happening. You're going to be taking more hits, arguably because you're missing 2 of your cornerstones on the defensive side. You'll see further steps taken back there where those guys can't get off the field, which means times of possession isn't going to work in their favor. Again, you start thinking about him being underutilized and stuff. Just feels like a missed opportunity, right? And then you look at Jermaine Johnson. 2 teams apparently were down to the wire and trying to figure out if they can officially land him, right? 49ers, where he has his connection to Robert Saleh, of course, and then the Bears. And I don't know which one of the 2 or if both, but it did seem like reports indicated that not only did the New York Jets want a 2nd-round pick, but that both and or one of these teams were willing to offer that. And the Jets still ended up deciding against that, which I think was the smart move. Again, you guys by now know I feel like he is the face of this defense and could have been even prior to the trades. And he's going to be a cornerstone piece. He's going to be a flagpole player for the New York Jets defense when it comes to what's the DNA, what's the mold, what's the play style look like. Present Jermaine Johnson. These are the kind of guys that we want to get, right? He also had tweets afterwards. And in light here, I'll just pick out the one that mattered most. He said, I believe strongly in the organization, staff, and my brothers in the locker room, right? Obviously, he has some sentiments out there about how sad it is to see Quinnen and Sauce Gardner going. And it's also disbelief, right? I think when we were talking contract extensions and stuff, the idea was always that Garrett and Sauce would be the guys that got extended, and hopefully you can keep Breece or hopefully you can keep Jermaine as well. But one of those guys was going to be missing. I wouldn't have pegged that Breece Hall and Jermaine Johnson were going to be the lone survivors of that quintuplet of players that could have propelled us to a lot of excellence. But ultimately, for a lot of the people that were on the positive side of these trades happening as well, that we're going to talk about here momentarily, the idea was we were losing with these guys already, right? So you might as well get the huge haul and be able to reset with a ton of top tier guys here. And I can't really knock that thought process, right? I think at this point we've tried the rebuild thing over and over and over in different variations of keeping a ton of veterans and going full youth movement and, bringing in culture guys, not bringing in culture guys, going heavy free agency. Something will have to click at some point. And I think at least, even though it hasn't added up to wins, you're seeing this coaching staff start to corral a lot of these players. Williams, you're seeing Jermaine Johnson be able to have a strong impact, even though it's not showing up all over the stat sheet. You were even seeing Michael Clemens start to improve and bounce back a little bit. You're seeing Quincy kind of hit the ground running a little bit, coming back from injury. Sherwood, at least decent in some areas of his game, but probably not quite a fit. You have Jarvis Brownlee stepping up. You've seen the games from Breece Hall. You feel good about the tackles. Basically, just chalk up the O-line being a plus. Garrett Wilson is Garrett Wilson, and you're looking to try to continue to find some pieces. Tyler Johnson may be a veteran type answer there, as opposed to Josh Reynolds, and then now you have this bevy of new guys that we're going to talk about here. But let's get into the first player, right? The one that's probably going to be unknown for a lot of you. The Chargers and the Jets agreed on a trade, and it was to acquire cornerback Ja'Sir Taylor. He was a 6th-round pick for the Chargers in 2022, over 50-plus games played. He was a playmaker back in college, Wake Forest, I believe it was, where he had 8 interceptions over 5 seasons. And you have seen a diminishing role for him on defense as he turns into more of a special teams core player. 49% defensive usage in 2023. Drops all the way down to 3% in 2025, but he is playing, I think it was like 145 special team snaps so far this year over the first 8 games, and probably 9 snaps, something like that I saw for the defense. But again, just more pieces, more guys to try to go out there and just see what sticks, what lands. Again, another cornerback addition, which at this point I feel like I shouldn't be surprised that they're going to continue to bring in cornerback after cornerback after cornerback. But the Chargers potentially receive, and it says conditional 7th-round pick in the 2028 draft, but realistically, just from what I saw, it looks like that condition is just based on him passing a physical. Otherwise, you're getting this guy for essentially next to nothing. So it doesn't hurt, especially if he ends up being a core special team player for us. If somehow he turns into some kind of rotation role player for us on defense as well, then it's a plus. But you take a dart throw for a guy that's at least been able to stick around in the league for his rookie contract, and you feel pretty decent walking away from that, right? Now, let's get into the actual trades that matter, right? The one that stocked up our war chest. You're talking 2 first-round picks this year, 2 second-round picks. You have 3 first-round picks in 2027, I believe it is, and I think 2 second-round picks that year as well. We effectively control the course of 2026 and 2027 draft classes, right? We're going to be huge players, and whether we stay pat, whether we move up, whether we trade down. I've seen people talking about the idea of taking one of these picks in each of the next year for the first round and trading back and continuing to acquire first round picks. Imagine you can have a situation where you trade out of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd overall pick, whatever we land at in this draft, drop down to maybe the 8, 9, 10 range, pick up a first next year in addition to whatever else you get. Now you have 4. You can take those, move them back, right? But on the eve of watching Mangold and the ceremony put on for him, it did make me think back to his draft class, right? And I believe it was his where we had the trio of draft picks. If I'm remembering correctly, him, Brickashaw, and was it Revis? Somebody else. I feel like there was a 3rd player in there. I'm not quite remembering. It could also be a different class, but 2027 feels like the year. Also, that is one of the most important draft class years because it's the one that everybody is claiming to just be over flooding with not only the upper echelon top tier talent where you're talking, potentially a dozen blue chip players out there, right? With your Arch Mannings, and you think about like Jeremiah Smith being draft eligible for the first time and stuff. It's a great opportunity in time for the Jets to have that many picks to move up, will and deal, whatever it is that they're looking to do, right? You fast forward to the current draft and you feel good about the positioning, right? It doesn't matter if we do end up effectively getting a very late first. We know our pick is expected to be a pretty high one, assuming we don't win too many more games here. But the Colts, we end up trading Sauce Gardner. We get that first pick this year. We get the first pick in 2027, and we get effectively a 2024 second round pick in wide receiver Adonai Mitchell. Now, the only thing, as I'm kind of marinated on this, that I don't love about the player acquisitions is at positions of need and all this good stuff, right? But in every case, it's players that the arrow wasn't trending up on, right? It's a lot of unfulfilled promise. And I'm kind of at this point where, continue to take the dart throws. I love all of that, but let's not rely on assuming these guys are going to develop and figure it out with the Jets, especially when you want to talk offensively, where it's always been a struggle for us to not only just have a modern offense, but for us to actually develop multiple weapons. I'll say we've always somehow found a way to at least get one, whether it was us picking up a free agent or whether it was us drafting a guy and getting lucky, even if only for a few years. But we've always seemed to at least been able to find one. So Adonai Mitchell, I feel really good about, but I think this kind of sums up where we're at with him at this point. He's played somewhere in the range of like 24 snaps over the last 5 games with the Colts. So clearly they weren't feeling as great about his prospects of taking that second year leap and all that kind of stuff, even though they've had Jonathan Taylor, even though they have Michael Pittman, and even though they have Tyler Warren, right, as guys that are rounding things out, can take double teams and stuff like that to help some of these other guys open up. So we'll see what we can ultimately do with him. Again, kind of has that second, third wide receiver ability, but I want to see it. The next 8 games that we have or so here are going to be huge tryout moments. The one thing I will say I love, 3 additional years of control with Adonai Mitchell. So you're not talking about, even if he doesn't look overwhelmingly great this year, you already have him on the roster for next year, right? So worst case scenario, if you want to pencil him in as wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, it's probably a pretty good depth option for you to be able to rely on at that point. The Colts did get Sauce Gardner from us, of course. I did find some interesting things just from that whole situation. I know his brother came out, who happens to be part of his agency team, and he mentioned there was no indication of a trade occurring. Sauce Gardner also ended up mentioning that there's no ill will towards the Jets. He didn't see it coming whatsoever, really had no kind of inclination that this was going to happen. But there's also an important distinction here that Sauce Gardner wasn't requesting the trade. He wasn't a disgruntled player that wanted to be out or anything like that from the organization. As Mougey highlighted in his press conference, the Colts just kept escalating the offer until they were able to get things done. They wanted him that badly. And considering we weren't winning, considering even next year, you're not probably talking about us being a double-digit win team, go ahead and make it happen. Accelerate the rebuild. Yes, you'll be looking for another Sauce Gardner, essentially, or potentially that's maybe not even your thought process, right? Maybe you're saying, hey, maybe I can try to land a Pat Surtain or Derek Stingley or a Devon Witherspoon or someone like that fits the mold a little bit more. There were some comments from a former executive as well. Scott Pioli spent a couple years with the Jets, ended up going to the Patriots, but he had an overlap with Aaron Glenn. And so he was mentioning his thought process around the trade and why they also would have accepted was that Sauce Gardner, as I discussed in a live, just doesn't necessarily fit the mold of what Aaron Glenn wants at cornerback, right? The physicality, the play style, even the ability to go out there and consistently or at least have the ability to go out there and make plays on the ball. We've seen how Jarvis Brownlee has taken to things. So like in all scenarios, right? Even if it was Sauce Gardner being able to force fumbles, whether it was him being able to pick balls off, right? I think either of those situations they would have been able to live with. But I think he has 2 or 3 picks to his name so far. I know it's not like he's being targeted a ton, but I would imagine from an efficiency standpoint, he's probably getting 1 interception in like every I don't know, 400 something snaps, as opposed to some of these other top tier guys that are making things happen. So, it is what it is there. And then the other one, the Cowboys trade, right? We get a 2026 second round pick. We also get a 2027 first round pick. And the cool part about this is that the Cowboys had two, and we're going to be guaranteed to get the higher, or I guess the lower, however you're looking at it. But whichever pick is closest to the first overall pick will be the one that the New York Jets get there. And then we get a first round guy in Mazi Smith, who was just picked up in this draft, right? And the Chargers are going to get Quinnen Williams, obviously. There's a whole story. I'm going to do a separate video for this, but there's a whole report coming out about actually just how bad Quinnen Williams' relationship with the Jets started to sour and what that ultimately ended up looking like. But in his mind, this is good news. Again, Cowboys, if they can fix some of the defensive problems, they have the ability to turn their season around and still try to make the playoffs. Probably the first time Quinnen Williams would be part of a team with a winning season. And he gets to reunite with Aaron Whitecotton, which is a guy he just kind of fell in love with as his former defensive line coach with the Jets before Saleh's staff got broken up. So already going to be familiarity, already going to be an understanding of how they want to utilize him to turn him into that Aaron Donald predecessor. Is that the right word? No. You guys get the gist of what I'm saying here, right? But I will say this. Mazi Smith already wasn't doing well in the eyes of the Cowboys. Otherwise, I don't think you include a guy that you just invested so much research, time, and energy into drafting. And he's not known as a pass rush guy, right? So best case scenario, he becomes one of the best defensive tackle or nose tackle interior players in the league. And maybe you get some pass rush pop, right? But it's not going to be the same effect, same quality, same tier of player, most likely as a player like Quinnen Williams here. So an uphill battle there, but in his case, it's only 1 year. There's going to be an adjustment, right? Again, trench play, there's a whole different level of transitioning when it comes to the athleticism and skill set and all that kind of stuff coming from college. There's definitely a better opportunity for us to be able to rely on him. But still, I would say you feel better about that interior run between Mazi Smith, what Jawan Bricks has shown, and who Harrison Phillips is as a leader, and at least the skill set he offers, while still continuing to be able to add and peck away and hammer away and figure out who's going to be the answer there for you while you rebuild things in the trenches there as well. But sad to see him go, man. Honestly, for the guys that do go out there and buy these jerseys and, super invest in supporting the team and checking out their favorite players and stuff, things like this is just a nuisance. And I feel like this really is a wash, rinse, repeat kind of situation for the Jets. But let me know what you guys think. What's your confidence level in the Jets being able to take advantage of all these newly acquired picks? Do you feel like we have any steals in potentially a guy like Adonai Mitchell being able to show out, Mazi Smith, maybe a guy like John Mechie? And I'll catch you guys again. Appreciate the support as always. Peace.